So thank you for joining the second chapter seminar for the year. Today we are lucky to have two presenters that will talk to us about various blind spots and blockages insight into the state of Australian heavy vehicle road safety data. So the seminar is in person here as well as online, and we've got quite a few people online. So the two presenters today are Adam Gibson from the NTARC Research Manager, and we also have Marcus Cosgrove from the National Road Freighters Association. And today they will tell us about the latest data about the safety of trucks after the National Truck Accident Research Centre reported on trends in Australian heavy vehicles over 20 years using data from insurance. So Adam is a research manager for NTARC. He's based at NTARC head office where we are today, and he brings an independent view on customers' issues and their business. He believes that the industry's #1 priority is getting people home safely, and he's passionate about the ongoing improvement in productivity in transport. So he got a lot of experience in the industry, and he had held previous position as specialist heavy vehicle engineer, project manager within the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, and he has a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering. And after Adam has shown us his slides, and we'll have Marcus, who will present as well. And he has been a long time B-double truck driver, and he also obtained his Master's in Business Administration in 2023, and a Certificate O in Work Health and Safety, and he's passionate about returning home safely as well, and a lot of background in the industry. And they want to share with us their views about how to make truck drivers having an enjoyable and safe working environment. So without further ado, I will get Adam to share his slides first. And also the meeting is recorded, so just want to make sure that also you are happy, and so that people are not able to attend today, but can be able to see the presentation online afterwards.
Excellent. For the people in the room, bathrooms are out and around from the reception. Make sure you get my card from me, because you need to swipe a card to get to the bathrooms, which makes me uncomfortable from a social equity sort of point of view. If it does the beep beep or the whoop whoops, follow the instructions. Meeting area down across near the Criterion Hotel on the other corner. So I'm Adam Gibson, Transport Research Manager at NTI. We have then taken our history of using our claims data to report on harm in road transport, and established an arm's-length partnership with Monash University Excellent Research Centre and the National Road Safety Partnership Program to deliver that work, and I'm then seconded across to that. So I sort of bounce between two hats a little bit there, but I'm really just a massive truck nerd. Another little note there, we're meeting today basically the nexus between the lands of the Yugara and the Turrbal people, because it's just a natural meeting place where we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I want to talk really about the state of the data around heavy vehicle road safety, because it's a passion project for both me personally and for NTI. And there are things that we bring to the table, and it's a credit to my predecessor, Owen Driscoll, but there are challenges as well. So I'll talk. It's going to work for me if I get that right. No, it's not. It's got a flat battery, so I will do it the old school way. Very quick introduction to NTI, then talk about what data is out there and how it's used. And then if we have time after Marcus is present, we're going to do a little bit of show and tell that I think this room will very much enjoy as well. So who's NTI? We're a very strange one. We are a joint venture between two competitors, the two largest general insurers in Australia, being IAG and Suncorp, or Vero and CGU, their respective insurance arms. So it's a bit like having divorced parents. They can't really talk to each other, but they have to sit in a room and talk with us. It's a very strange board meeting. And it puts us in a pretty special place, having access up into those organisations, whilst also still being arm's length and able to operate independently. We are a specialist. There's a bunch of stuff we cannot do and do not do. We will not insure your house, your factory, your pub, all these other areas. We basically insure trucks, cargo, whether that's domestic or global, mobile plant and equipment. And we have a very small worker-to-worker liability line that really is just there to complement those other products. And that's really it. We have a direct roadside breakdown service for trucks. So if you have that cover, or you've bought a new truck from most of the manufacturers in Australia and truck breaks down, and you ring the number that they've given you, one of our contractors that will show up to help you out. But yeah, we only do a very small number of things that we focus on doing very well, to the point where we are a foundation sponsor of the ATA. We have relationships with every transport association in the country, and then a bunch on the logistics space as well, the CTAAs, the CILTAs, the blanking on a few there. We take our industry relationships very seriously. That's enough about us. What do we see in the data? First thing is we use our data. So they've pulled this from the old slides mostly. Back. This is my second day in the office in 6 weeks. This is some data I talked about in 2020's report process, this is May of 2020. People were a bit distracted with some other stuff going on. But what I was there to talk about was after truck occupant deaths averaging 34 for the prior decade, they spiked in 2019 to 62 or 63. So that's truck occupant deaths in motion accidental road crashes. There's reasons for some of those caveats that I'll come back to later. And it was interesting because you can go and search anywhere else prior to, I think it was about the 6th or thereabouts of May, you will find no reference to this. So a category of workers in Australia saw a dramatic increase in the number of workplace deaths. And not only did we not respond, as best as I can tell, nobody else even noticed. And that is frustrating. And you look in the social media space around the transport industry, and people were, like at least anecdotally, commenting on an increase in both severe crashes and also truck driver deaths. But the fact that it's doesn't land on anyone's desk, particularly, it falls into a bit of a gap between police, other road safety agencies, transport departments, the NHVR. And so it's a bit of a case of it's everybody's problem and it's nobody's problem. In the years since, I don't have a nice slide for it, I had to compile it, we've been hovering around the sort of 50 to 55 truck occupant deaths in motion accidental road crashes every year. So it has not returned to that prior level. We're sitting above the prior decades long average. And again, it doesn't see the attention that it deserves. But I have a quick run through some of the data we use to report and talk about this, to try to inform industry and other stakeholders around the shape of that harm using our claims data. So someone here, this is my overarching measure of the heavy vehicle industry safety performance in Australia. So this is heavy vehicle involved. And every single time I will say that involved does not mean caused. Accidental road crash deaths per billion tonne kilometres of road freight in Australia over the last basically 20 years. And the story it tells is a generally positive one, that by that measure at least, the road transport industry in Australia has been getting safer. We've moved more freight. We've gone from sort of 140-ish billion tonne kilometres at the start of that time period to about 210 billion tonne kilometres at the end of that time period. And we've gone from having something around 300 accidental road crash deaths to something about 200 vehicle-involved accidental road crash deaths. And so that trend is good. And I have another slide I can find later that looks at the relationship between the worsening of the Australian overall road toll and the heavy vehicle. Can we put a question there?
I have, sorry.
No, good.
Is part of that larger vehicles, so you've got fewer drivers per tonne?
Really excellent question. And there is unquestioned, that's why that normalisation, in my view, is so important and so easy to get wrong. One of the things that's a recurring thing when particularly transport departments talk around heavy vehicle road safety is they'll say something to the effect of heavy vehicles in Australia make up X% of vehicle registrations, but they are involved in, and if I mentioned that involved does not mean caused, involved in Y% of accidental road crash deaths. The problem with that, and Narelle has immediately honed in on it, is that it's not the act of registering a truck that creates the danger. It is essentially the front of trucks that is dangerous. And what makes Australia globally innovative and globally world leading is our ability to pack a lot more tonnes behind that front. And so the safety dividend delivered through productivity increases, that is the shift from, rigid trucks, having my late father-in-law's parents were Leo Julius, transported to Brisbane, and it would have been Dodgers and I'm trying to Studebaker trucks pre-World War II.
Common office,
Through to the deregulation of long-distance road transport, the adoption of the 5 and then 6-axle semi-trailer as the long-distance backbone of Australian road transport, and then the adoption of e-doubles and so on. Every one of those productivity increases has delivered a safety dividend, and we're now finally belatedly starting to see that with the uptake of high productivity PBS combinations as well. And so getting the right normalisation here is important. I wrote a deeply tongue-in-cheek article you can find on LinkedIn entitled, a long time ago, entitled How to Tell If Your Bus Driver is a Serial Killer, which picks out if you get the normalisation wrong, you can tell a very distorted story. But my headline on this is, if you take the literal interpretation of how someone has presented the data. So for example, that trucks are overrepresented in road crash deaths. If we took that literally and said, okay, we're going to ban trucks, we're going to move all road freight in light commercial vehicles, would the road toll go up or would the road toll go down? And anyone that should be in this room should intuitively know that if we move all road freight the same volumes, 210, 220 billion tonne kilometres, 225 billion tonne kilometres of road freight, doing it all with light commercial vehicle use, it would increase dramatically because we would be seeing, well, everyone in Australia would have to work in road transport. We're probably still looking to get all of the freight moved. And so making sure we use the right normalisations ourselves and we call out where we see the wrong normalisation used to misrepresent the key messages from the data. Again, apply that test. If I take this presentation of data at face value and I applied it as a policy, would the harm we're trying to reduce or increase? And if it doesn't, that is the wrong representation of data and needs to be called out. All right, excellent question. I inherited a structure that looks at the cause of losses over $50,000 of incident value inside of NTI's insured data set. It has some challenges. For a start, we are only a property insurer. And secondly, it's essentially immediate proximate cause. What was the last action or inaction that could have either contributed to or could have prevented that event? And it has therefore the risk of feeling very blamey and being a bit safety 1.0 in its language and thinking. So a lot of our work since I took over has been around trying to call out those limitations and also trying to reframe that. Look, just because the driver fell asleep while driving doesn't mean that the way you stop this is by telling drivers not to fall asleep while driving or punishing them for falling asleep while driving. That does not deliver the safety. That there needs to be a lot more consideration and nuance in our response to the data than is necessarily contained within the structure of this data. So for example, we don't use driver anymore, we talk about human factors, crashes, and we're very careful to define what we're looking at and what it might tell us around a potential response. Beyond that, if this is going to load, so we start talking about structures. The big increase have been on inattention and distraction crashes, and that's a complicated problem. Like, you're looking at loss of task focus, regardless of why it occurred. If we had a silver bullet there, that would be great. But of the solutions we tend to fall to at the moment, tend to be technologically focused, driver monitoring systems. The change management and the human factors of the implementation of those technologies makes that exceptionally difficult, and we are not good at it as an industry.
This is, I'm sorry, Adam. That was inattention on the part of the driver, not the other person.
No, that was looking at, so in our data set, because we only get rich information on our at fault crashes, everything that's not at fault is just bundled up under not at fault.
Okay.
So this looks at, this is old, this is the 2019 data from 2020. What was the immediate proximate cause of crashes where our insured drivers died? And in that year, it was fatigue, inattention and distraction, and then inappropriate speed, which is predominantly inappropriate speed, primarily single vehicle under rollover crashes. And I have to mention, because I mention it every time as well, that inappropriate speed does not mean that they're breaking the speed limit. almost all these trucks will be speed limited. And in many cases, even when they're on lower speed limit roads, it would be geometrically impossible to have been breaking the speed limit to crash at that corner, because you would have crashed in the 5 preceding corners there. You might have a series of S-bends that you can go through at 45 kilometres an hour. You've crashed at the 5th one. It's an 80 kilometre an hour speed zone. You couldn't have gotten to the corner you crashed at if you had been going 90. You would have crashed at the first corner. So it's just worth calling out that putting higher speed enforcement in is very unlikely to meaningfully influence that rate of incident. And again, the shape has changed a little bit in subsequent years. I apologise for not having a fresher slide deck, but I am just back on the road. And again, all of that data is available in the annual reports. Decrease in what I now would actually don't use fatigue or go this year. We should stop seeing fatigue or start seeing sleep driving, because what we're really looking at here is gross sleep driving. It's not impairment due to fatigue. It is people that are sound asleep whilst driving a truck at 90 kilometres an hour. Which is ill advised, in case they need to say. Yeah, it's quite a challenge.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, good opportunity to catch up on some sleep. I will call out that the fire event in that year is anomalous. It's very unusual for us to see truck driver deaths in non-impact fire crashes. That one was quite anomalous. Now we'll talk about some other data sets. And I was chatting to the people in the room about this before we kicked off. There's some challenges around how other agencies collate and categorise data around heavy vehicle involved harm. So this is how Safe Work Australia has its categorisation of work fatalities. And again, all credit to the team at Safe Work Australia for aggregating this data across a bunch of different jurisdictions, each with their own structures and timelines and needs. But what it tends to do, both in this and also in the industry space, is split up a lot of incidents that are all heavy vehicle involved or heavy vehicle adjacent. So what we can't see there is what proportion of those vehicle incident deaths are heavy vehicles. We have no split there. That I feel should be doable. Then we've got falls from height. We will have probably 3 of those, I guess, each year that are, in average over a long term, that are workers falling from heavy vehicles whilst loading and unloading. Being hit by moving objects, some amount of those will be forklifts driving around with a pallet on the front and hitting a worker, and then being hit by falling objects. Well, that's just a nuance between, did the load fall off the forklift first and then hit you, or was the load still on the forklift when it hit you? And I've seen individual incidents that I've tracked and followed up with state agencies. I'd actually like to take a moment here to note the passing of Grant Phillips from the Queensland Office of Industrial Relations. He was a wonderful man, very passionate on his work, and it made me very sad to hear of his passing. That, when I tracked up individual incidents, you'd see 3 events that were all vehicle loading and unloading in a depot or a distribution centre that fell across 3 different categories where nobody else would describe them as being different hazards. They're simply different mechanisms. And it creates the impression that there is a greater range of hazards in place and that danger around heavy vehicles is a lower priority than it otherwise would be. And if I continue that thinking around work fatalities by industry, there will be a significant subset of those construction deaths, agriculture, forestry and fishing deaths that relate to incident in and around heavy vehicles. And again, because of how the reporting is structured, we don't get a clear picture of how much of that harm relates to one activity, one category of risk. And I think what's needed here is a bit like something I'll talk on the next slide, I think. If I got it right, I did excellent. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics did two really great pieces of work where they went and said that the current split where they report by ANZIF code, industry of employer, misrepresents the scale of transport as an activity, because, and this is what this graph shows, that varies here, and the 2 lines down the bottom there, that pretty much half of all transport activity in Australia is not hire and award transport activity. It's in-house transport activity. So it's, you work for Heidelberg Construction Products and you're driving a concrete agitator. Well, you might think of yourself as a truck driver, but the ABS thinks of you as a construction worker. Right. If you crash, you are not a transport, postal, warehousing death. You will be a vehicle crash, road fatality. Although weirdly not, if I jump back slightly, if I jump back here, you'll see that rollover is its own category. So If a vehicle rolls over, is that not a vehicle incident? Again, with this weird categorisation that runs the risk of diluting the concentration of harm in Australian workplaces around heavy vehicles. It's just peculiar. And I think this is a really great, this ABS work is a really great piece of work. What they said, what if we just ignored that categorisation we're historically aligned with, and we just said, cool, this is a thing that involves transport. What would that transport in its totality look like? And instead of it being like 1 in every 25 or something employees in Australia, it's all of a sudden it's 1 in every 8. And instead of it being 1 in every $19 of the Australian GDP, it's 1 in every 14. All of these changes that happen when you look at it in that view, I think there's a real need in the safe work data to take that sort of mindset. Let's ignore whether your ANZIF code of your employer for taxation purposes was construction or a transport post or warehousing. Let's instead look at the activity you're undertaking. The other one I want to talk on for its both value but also shortcomings is the Australian Road Deaths database compiled by Bitro. It has, so the black columns there, that will be very hard to read, but for anyone who's played in it, you will know what it says. It has bus involvement, heavy rigid truck involvement, and articulated truck involvement flags. I then go through on a periodic basis and have to manually add a bunch of additional categories. I've actually missed some in that table because I actually have a few more I'll leave out of scope for today to actually allow a better unpack and review of that data. Things you cannot do using the Australian Road Deaths database. As an example, is tell how many truck drivers are killed in accidental in-motion road crashes each year. Because whilst it has rigid truck or articulated truck involvement, and it will tell you that the category of the road user category of the person who died is a driver or a passenger, you don't know whether they were in a light vehicle or a heavy vehicle. So if a truck and a car are involved in a fatal crash and the driver is killed, this doesn't tell you whether that was a truck driver or a car driver. So you cannot tell from this data set, which is one of the reasons why, because I do this manual tracking, and it's very painful, very manual task, only I was able to talk about the number of road crash deaths come that spike in 2019 is because the very people who should have been tracking it can't by the very structures of their own data. So there's a few changes I've called on from how the ARDD is structured, and it's pretty simple stuff. Could we just have the vehicle category of the road user who is deceased? So it's driver, articulated vehicle. Secondly, could we please have involvement flags for every category of vehicle, not just the heavy vehicle category? So that feels a lot like that's just calling out anomalous data. We don't really belong in this data set. It is very strange to not have those other categories. The other thing that I push for, and is wildly unpopular with the people who control these data sets, is I believe we should be able to have the vehicle category of the prima facie at fault party. And I know that talking about fault is, considered a bit Stone Age in a lot of circles. But what we're really looking to say is, where is the primary systems failure that resulted in that crash? Which systems? To quote Ron Finnemore, he had some wonderful data from his seeing machine systems and the dash cameras showing that all of the fatals they'd been involved in the prior 18 months had all been other people crashing into his trucks. All, literally all.
It's more than one, that's
and he regrettably had more video and more data than any business should have to aggregate. He said, I'm not sure what more I'm meant to do to stop people from crashing into our trucks. And when we obscure this, we end up with misdirected effort in the road safety space. That if the truck is obeying every applicable risk control as currently exists, and another vehicle crosses the centre line and crashes into the front of the truck, running a blitz on truck drivers' work hour compliance in their work diaries is unlikely to prevent recurrence of that event. But that's what we currently do. And so that's one of the challenges in the ARDD. There is some bright lights I just pulled a random cross-section. Some of these are newer, some of these are older. In the broader road safety research space, the one I particularly want to call out is that work out of the Centre for Automotive Safety Research down in South Australia, where through some really long-term effort, access to some pretty rich data and protections to allow them to do quasi no blame incident investigation on a subset of 100 heavy vehicle crashes, which in terms of testing how will the expansion of the ATSB's remit into road transport look like, that is the best we have to follow at this time. But I do want to call out, if, again, it's particularly transport departments that are most guilty of this, they wish to continuously say trucks are X% of registrations, but they are Y% of involved in, again, involved does not mean caused, Y% of road crash deaths. I would like to ask, and we are pushing to ask, particularly at the Australian Road Safety Conference in Perth later in this year, what proportion of funded road safety research in Australia relates to heavy vehicles specifically? Because you can't really say that we're a key priority because we're a terrible problem because we cause, and I put that in air quotes, all of this harm, and then not fund almost any research into that space, which is the current situation we are in. If road safety research is a drop in the well, who went to you're at the ARSC in Hobart last year? How many mentions did you know of heavy vehicle related harm?
I don't.
There was one poster in the poster session.
Right.
That was it.
I was going to say, I didn't notice any sessions. Yeah.
Nothing, literally nothing.
I mean, and frankly, researchers do what they have the money to do.
Exactly, and so I go to call to the funders.
Yeah.
The other part we will call out, and Sian makes very much the same point when I make my point there, is also access to industry. I'm aware of a few pieces of research we're trying to get access to the right stakeholders to be part of the research and keeping their engagement was just exceptional. What it's work that Dr. Nicholas Gilson out of UQ did on driver health and recruitment and stakeholder involvement was eye-wateringly painful for all of his research. And so part of it falls to the industry side to make sure that the transport industry makes itself available and contributes to the degree that it needs to. But there is also the other element. We need the funders to be asking the right questions and funding meaningful research. I see that we've got a few boxes in the chat here for a moment. I know, just Barry heading off, no worries. Can I restart my share if it's saying it's paused? I don't know. Anyway, I did break this. How do I turn my share back on? It's only my closing slide anyway. Why is my screen sharing paused? I don't know what I've done. Anyway, that's all. It's only just my logo anyway. Yes, that's really my cross-section of data around harm in road transport as I see it. I apologise if I have missed anyone who's got an amazing data set that I should have mentioned and didn't. But yeah, there's both a lot of challenges, but that is also opportunity. Right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam.
What about can we go from here?
Either or, should be able to do.
Just going to share the slides.
Yeah. Okay. That'll be done.
Right, well, it's really much. Oh, you're off. Maybe we should help you.
No, it's all good.
I'm impressed because I could read that small print there. My eyesight's getting better. My hair's growing back and I could read that without my glasses on.
So hi everyone, my name's Marcus Cosgrove and I'm the State Director for Queensland for the National Road Freight Association. I know that photo's about 3 years old, but excellent. So pretty much the NRFA, if you do not know who we are, we were established in 2008. We are committed to promoting a culture of safety, sustainability, profitability across the Australian road freight industry. So, and again, our mission is to have a unified voice for all heavy vehicle drivers, owner operators. Doesn't matter if you're small, medium or large. We are a group that's, we are all truckies working for truckies. So it doesn't matter if you're driving a B-double or a rigid vehicle. We're a group of individuals that are here to look after our industry. Pretty much as an organisation, there was a lot of achievements that we had in last year in 2024, and one was the closing of the loopholes 1 and 2 which was implemented. So in our industry, we've had a lot of issues around wage theft, to call some of them out, minimum standards for the gig economy, so our Ubers and so forth, changes around the casual employment, so truck drivers being engaged as a casual employee, but they're working beside someone who is a full-time employee. So we jumped on Glenn Sterl's mission to bring forward some of those big things, and mostly the big thing that we actually did get across the line was the abolishing of the 90-day plus payment terms for all contractors. So if you've got a mum and dad business, for instance, and you're trying to run a business and you're trying to pay the fuel bills and so forth, and you've got a contractor only paying you 90 days, 120 days, it's very, very hard. So we've now reduced that down to 30 days to 90 days maximum, but it's more around about talking to the contractors and so forth. We did actually focus on the sham contracting and unfair terms in contracts. I think we're mostly now starting to get some traction in that area, but there's heaps of room to improve. Other activities that we are involved in, and this is what I'm mostly involved here in the state of Queensland, is the Gympie bypass, which has now been completed for our heavy vehicle drivers. We've just started the Tyro bypass, which is another safety thing that we're going to be achieving. It's in design phase at the moment. So at the moment, we're pushing forward to heavy vehicle rest areas in that 9 to 15 kilometre stretch. And that's based on if you are going from Brisbane, you're going to far north Queensland. Around that Tyro area is a really good spot for those drivers to pull up.
Can I just add something in there? When I was running to Mackay all the time, when I first started doing it, I found it a bit tricky to find parking bays on the way back.
Absolutely.
I just found it like you're on them before you could get in them, or they were too short or badly placed or whatever they were. It's a fair while ago, but it's just something that I recall.
Yeah, and that's what we're really working on is because the federal government, and we thank the federal government for this, they're actually providing us money now to upgrade the Bruce Highway. It is one of our major lifelines to far north Queensland. And again, over the years, we're going to see those rest areas updated. I'm also jumping onto the Embley Royal Air Force interchange. So we've been given $200 million from the Albanese government as stage one. And that's more around about, designing and so forth. My federal member in Blair, he has been the champion for this one, and then we'll go to stage 2 after that, industry and community consultation. And pretty much as a group, what we try to do is build those relationships with our friends at NTI, National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, the TWU, the Department of Transport, plus more. So pretty much, let's talk about me, because this is the first time that I've done a presentation to the ACRS. So my story in 5 minutes. So pretty much, I'm a heavy vehicle driver. So I spend 3/4 to nearly 90% of my workday behind a truck. That was my first truck I brought. Loved it.
It's the last one I bought.
And it was my last one.
So, that's the same one as the last one.
My lovely wife decided that we needed to go in a different direction when I now work for Australia Post. So I now don't own my own truck. So again, I started in the road transport industry at the age of 14 for a family-owned business. And my first job was a concrete floor cleaning technician, aka shed sweeping expert. So I actually took a lot of pride in that one. And again, against my parents' wishes, I chose to drive trucks as a career. So I've nearly pretty much touched every part of this great country we call Australia, except Tasmania. And I've completed a Master's in Business Administration in 23, whilst working as an interstate truck driver and transport manager. In my 24 years of heavy vehicle driving, I have driven on average about 3,900 kilometres per week, average of 191,100 kilometres per year. And pretty much across my whole career so far, it's about 4.6 million kilometres I've driven, or 114 times around this lovely world. So pretty much an average interstate truck driver does actually drive around about the 6,000 kilometres per week. Okay, so it's a lot. So when you see a truck driver, give him a wave and say, hey, you're doing a great job. Keep going. So again, I'm employed as a B-double driver with Australia Post. I'm a work health and safety rep as well at Redbank. Driver education educator and chief morale officer. That damn big hat I've got on my head there was a joke, but it actually put a lot of smiles on a lot of people's faces. I'm passionate about road safety, and again, I've achieved everything in my transport career whilst dealing with an acute brain injury from a high impact motor vehicle accident some 43 years ago. So why is road safety important to me? Those people up there. So there's my wife on the left-hand side, my 2 children, and my beautiful cat. So everything that I do in my day behind the wheel and in the work that I do with the ACRS is because of those beautiful people on that screen. We had a conference in Brisbane. We have a conference each year around Australia. We had one here in Brisbane where we spoke about how we can get our industry stronger together. So there's around about 260,000 trucks in Australia. And at the moment, there's 97.5% of them are male and 2.5% are female. And the average interstate truck driver earns around about 125,000 plus. I know Adam did touch on this as well. The best data I could come up with was we're at 7.9% GDP. Again, that's probably maybe wrong, but I was trying to
Of course, 1 in every 14. So that probably is that date also lines up with the second round of the ABS experimental merged data set.
Yeah. So, and again, with 396 heavy rigid trucks, 1,000 trucks, and then 124 articulated truck registered in Australia. So we are a massive industry, and again, we do a damn big job.
So one thing to point out on that, which I find interesting, comes up all the time. If you look at the ABS reporting by primary activity, so it's like a subset inside of occupation, you get truck driver machine operators, and you get that number 260,000. Then you look at the motor vehicle census data to get counts of rigid trucks and articulated trucks. And for those who are pretty good at maths,
it's only half the amount of drivers that you need to drive the vehicle.
And I think there's a lot of trucks that are parked up stationary a lot of the time, or there's a lot of people driving trucks who aren't truck drivers. That goes to that challenge around the risk of taking categorization and segmentation data at face value, because what that should tell you is that if any random truck has a fatal crash, there is a basically 50% chance the person driving it's not a truck driver, which aligns with my other broader observation around the ancillary and higher versus higher reward operations.
So current trends, heavy vehicle road transport industry. Pretty much driver fatigue. So from our regulator, the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, they have done a lot of work around driver fatigue in our transport industry. So driver fatigue refers to being tired, sleepy, exhausted, and it is a hard job that the truck drivers do. And again, the ability to react to hazards. They can be kangaroos to cars coming out from side streets and so forth. Pretty much driver fatigue can be one of the killers, one of the fatal 5. So pretty much at the moment on the data that I saw from the report just released, we have actually seen a slow and decrease of fatigue related accidents, which is really good for our industry. So what is driver distraction? So distraction occurs when a driver engages in a secondary activity that removes the attention from the primary driving task. So pretty much at the moment, from the most recent NTARC report, 75% of accidents were caused by inattention and distraction. One third were actually caused in major cities, and 37% involving a truck crashing off a road, on a straight road.
Is that a number you know is inattention or distraction, or is that kind
That's
of an
actually
assumption
fine, yeah.
because of how the accident happened?
Varies across, so we get each incident, we will get, a mix of, we'll get scene of incident photos from the towies, we'll get a driver's version of events, we might sometimes get a driver's version of events, an employer's version of events, and then get the dash camera footage, and the first two don't relate to the third, which is interesting at times. And we do it is only a desktop review, except for the very small subset where I'll go and drive out to the scene because I have that sort of remit. But for 99.99% of cases, it's a desktop only review looking at the totality of the information we've received and then making a best fit. So there is going to be some error in it, but that's true. It wouldn't be any different if it was a general duties police officer or even the police forensic crash investigator. The reason we group inattention and distraction together is you can see that there has been a loss of task focus, but unpacking whether that was because you were distracted, which is a specific loss of task focus, that something else has taken your attention away, versus inattention, which is a generalised loss of task focus, is very difficult. It's exceedingly problematic, in fact. So we just said, look, we are not going to be able to reliably break those apart, so we will merge them together. But it does make it challenging because it says, do I need to address technology-based distraction primarily, or are there other factors that are more in the generalised loss of task focus space? And again, this comes to limitations of what we can and do. There will be some subset, particularly where we've got inwards facing dash camera footage where you've got the richest idea, but that might be 20% of the losses. And you're also very brave to generalise beyond that. You could go look at that 20% and say that's the same for the rest, but we're not there yet. Although also nicely very quickly go to one of the challenges, there's a lot of resistance from drivers to inwards facing dash cameras. And look, I understand it, but a lot of the same cohort of drivers would love to have the insights that those cameras provide. And so finding the avenues to provide the level of trust and comfort required. And in most cases, I think it's very much that. It's not actually a problem with the camera itself. It's a lack of trust between frontline drivers and their management. Sorry.
So is driver distraction an issue within the road transport industry? 31.7% of incidences were, and this was from the NTARC report. So that is those grouped together. Fatigue at 9.5, that's a really good call out for our industry. I hope to see that that's going to continue going down and down and down, but let's see how we can.
My experience is you want to couple that up with the inattention and distraction as 40%. I would suggest that a lot of that is going to be fatigue. I can talk to you more about that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And what could be the cause of the distraction? So, as I've said most before, truck driver does around 6,000 kilometres as an interstate truck driver. Tight line haul deadlines. Drivers need to be away from their homes 5 days a week, missing their loved ones. And again, there was multiple times where as an interstate truck driver, I was away for 2 or 3 weeks in a row. So when you look at the brain and you're thinking, I wish I was at home for my daughter's birthday or so forth, that could also be a cause.
Oh, yeah.
Drivers knowing that they are missing out on very important moments in their family lives does really impact on the heavy vehicle driver. And knowing that they're doing a job that's actually providing for their home and families really does pull on the heartstrings as well. The digital age mental health issue, FOMO, if you've ever heard of that term, and busy brain. FOMO is pretty much the fear of missing out. So a lot of the stuff that I've seen through drivers driving for Australia Post in other major companies, the use of TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and that one's FaceTime, and the mobile phone has actually caused a lot of that issue. Is that lovely fear of missing out, having that stress of, what's happening at home with my loved ones. I'm lonely, isolation, low self-esteem, anxiety, loss of reality, negative feelings. I've actually felt every one of those. And it is also caused by social media. And again, a lot of truck drivers are actually using their mobile phones on TikTok whilst driving. And I have 2 videos. There we go. How safe is that? That was actually done in the Burnley Tunnel in Melbourne. And yeah, he was driving in nice peak hour traffic, having a good time talking to his mates. If you want to stop that when you can. And then there's the other one that was done in Sydney. Okay, I do apologise for the name he's called himself, but there's 2 examples of a truck driver, and I know he was a full B double driver, and he had dangerous goods on. So he was driving, having a good time, talking to his friends, and so that's fun. So pretty much what are our wins so far as an industry? We've gone from 27.3 accidents caused by fatigue in 2005 down to 9.5, so that's a really big win for us. But again, we've just had a recent heavy vehicle blitz here in Queensland. 487 units or prime movers were intercepted, 44 defects were issued, 15 fatigue-related heavy vehicle diary infringements were issued. So that to me calls out that we are actually doing something really, really good, but there is also room for improvement. So what are my next steps? So I'm wanting to continue to support drivers in the dangers of using digital platforms while driving, and again support the college in the development of sound safety policies and development for our industry. And that's it. Thank you so much for your time today.
Excellent, well done, thank you.
Thank you.
I have one observation, that it's, and it's another one on structures, which is, it was actually beaten into me by Andreas Bauhaus, who was the human factors consultant from the NHVR for a long time. He's a very smart gentleman. And he would hammer me any time that I used the word fatigue to mean work hours compliance. Yep. And I think it's one of the reasons I already, as in making that conscious shift away to the language of sleep driving, because it's essentially almost always talking about in what was historically the NTARC structured as fatigue, is to go and say that is a person driving while they're asleep. We don't have the subtlety and nuance in our data set to say that was a person who was 35% impaired compared to their optimal performance levels due to the impairment from fatigue. What we have is people with their chins on their chest, completely disengaged from the driving task and falling off straight, otherwise completely unchallenging pieces of road. And that came up at the gentleman that was doing his PhD.
Oh, that's
the ex-police officer in New South Wales. That he was really talking about work hours compliance, but spoke around fatigue. And I think it's a good program of work. It's just without clarity of language around that, you can have 2 people sitting there having what they think is a discussion, talking about 2 completely different things. Where we see work hour, and we generally get work hour pages where you've got a crash that has that look to it. It's very rare that we see a work hours non-compliance in our sleep driving crashes. In fact, we see a whole lot.
That's interesting. Right, that's a good question. So they're compliant by their book when they crash. Yeah. Right.
And it means that having, I wish that people in road transport didn't have the presumption of the work hours each week that they work. that I have the luxury of, I choose my own hours. I'm actually a mongrel of a boss, so I tend to work long hours, but I don't have my choice. Whereas there is very much an assumption in road transport, particularly long distance drivers, that you'll work essentially to the upper limit of the book becomes the lower
So
limit.
you'll actually work twice as many hours as
Yeah.
everybody else.
And that is normal.
Yeah.
That is absolutely the default assumption for long distance truck drivers is that you're driving very close to the maximum hours permitted in the work diary, and that includes working under schemes like BFM and AFM. And I wish that my friends in the trucking industry didn't have to work twice as many hours to make the living they make.
I mean, that goes into Marcus's presentation. I mean, there needs to be time for what we used to call, when I was doing work for NHVR and so on, activities of daily living. Yeah. And so activities of daily living are in addition to driving and sleeping. And they're parts, they are the keeping in touch with the family. They are sort of, paying your bills. There are all those other things that are not, not necessarily fun things, but I think that to me is a bit of a challenge, is that, where are the hours coming from for those things? And it's coming from while you're driving
Oh,
or
absolutely.
not happening at all.
And ideally, what you're seeing is, like you, in a 24-hour period, we always, in the transport industry, we talk about the 24-hour period. Regardless if you're on standard hours or BFM hours, so your standard hours, the driver can only drive for 12 hours in a 24-hour period, or 14 in a 24-hour period. There's also standards of, their rest breaks, so what I normally do is I go 5 hours, half an hour break, 5 hours, half an hour break, 2 hours, and then I'm home. So what, in essence, what you could be doing is, when you go to that last minute, is you're looking at doing 12 hours over a 5-day period, or in a fortnight you go 6 days, and then in your second week you do 5. So that is a lot of hours, more than a standard, let's say, office worker, for instance, or a pharmacist or whatever, so.
Actually, health is probably the one other space where I see those sorts of, it's more, hospital medical staff, but that's the only other space, like we would never tolerate it in aviation.
So, as an interstate driver at the moment, some and most actually are paid a per kilometre rate. Now, is that fair? I don't know. There's a lot of for and against it. There are a lot of operators that only pay per hour. So, if you're working on a 12-hour book, for instance, which is standard, you get paid for those 12 hours, or BFM 14. So, but then when you talk about, your everyday living things like having a meal, that comes out of your 7-hour stationary break. No truck driver goes, oh, actually, I'll have a break now, and I'll go and have this, I'll go and wash the clothes and whatever. But you're meant to be asleep for 7 hours. That's your sleeping. But no, you've got washing of clothes, washing the truck, refueling the truck. But under NHVR law, you're not meant to be doing those, refueling the truck in your rest hours, but they do.
And for me, if there was no HVNL work hour limits, and we simply had the general duty obligation to eliminate, or so far as reasonably practical, minimise transport safety risk, I don't believe the courts would be likely to find that we should be driving as long as the work limits allow. So the ironic effect, and I really mean ironic in the very literal sense of that word, is that by setting a maximum limit, we have actually increased what an acceptable amount of driving hours is, had it been not defined and left to the courts through probably the tragic process of having fatalities and then determining whether it was reasonable or not. I don't think we would have the numbers we have. And there's something slightly perverted in having an attempt to reduce or to cap hours, but having the effect of essentially creating a benchmark of driving to those limits. Cognizant of time, if we have...
Do you have any questions on that?
Yeah, I did post in the chat to say, is there anyone from the room, or from the Zoom rather, that has any observations or questions?
You had a video for us?
Yeah, if I want to make sure I cover that before I play. I've got some show and tell, but I am very, very cognizant of time that we are running up to the, and people are more than welcome to stay, and I'll play my two videos.
I don't have a question, but
I will.
go with your show and tell.
All right, I should do some show and tell. I am in the very lucky position of getting into the data up to my armpits, see problem areas, and then see if what I can manage to corral as things that might positively influence those challenges. So we did a big program for 2 years on dairy tanker safety, because dairy tankers are dramatically overrepresented in crashes. They have almost the perfect storm of partly loaded tankers with dynamic loads. Where do we grow milk? Gippsland. High rainfall, hilly, narrow roads, and it's a 24-hour operation. So they're there running into a farm at 2 a.m. on a wet Victorian winter in the middle of July. So it's a very challenging space. We did a lot of great work there, but I'm not going to share that today. I'm going to share, firstly, a little bit of work that came sort of flowed out from that. It's almost spilled milk bonus content, which is some work on managing steep descents. And the reason we've gone down this rabbit hole is it's not a burning platform out of our data, but it feels like the low-hanging fruit is still there. So rule 108, which is trucks and buses must use low gear, is we say that there are hazards out there in the road network, built hazards, that are so severe, we will locally change the law to try to manage that hazard. But there is no list, there is no map. We want it to be a surprise. Like, that is just a broken space. And so we've done this piece of work, and we've now proposed to Austro the piece of work to extend that to say, we need mapping layers, we need summary information sheets for every steep descent, at least on the national highway network, etc. Because it's weird that you could have a hazard that dangerous and so well known and have no aggregated information about it.
I'd say the training space, very few people actually go loaded down a range, and then in the whole time they learn to drive and anything to do with their driving test.
And it's one, particularly South Australia, Adelaide has very much grappled with, because they've got the Southeastern Freeway descent, which is, like having, for a Queenslander, it's like having Cunningham's Gap deliver you into Clayfield. Like, it's just a combination of a steep descent on a major freight route, the major freight route for them, dropping you into inner suburbia.
They've got a hill there that they could use, right? As part of whatever amount of hours of testing and learning you got to do, you could be able to map out, like, you've got to at least go up and down and below.
The challenge in Adelaide is that they have looked at making that a requirement. The challenge is, what do you do for the person who is 100 metres from the West Australian border and getting their licence? It would be problematic to require as a condition of the licence for them to come. And there are strategies. You just say it's not so much a precondition of the licence, but rather a micro-credential that you do an observed run down the hill before you do a solo run down the hill. But it doesn't align to our existing structures and mindset in Australia around what a heavy vehicle driver licence is. But I'll play this first, if this is going to work for me. Everyone cross your fingers for me, because I'm always terrified.
I think you need to share your screen.
Yeah, I'm about to go. Right, give me a moment. That one should hopefully work. Sorry, my battery's in the way, so I can't actually see the video that I need. Oh, where's my sound? I closed that. I've broken that, sorry.
G'day, my name's Adam Judge, and I've been driving multi-combination vehicles for the last 30 years, and I want to chat about managing steep descents. Getting a combination weighing as much as the house down a range descent safely is a demonstration of your professionalism and expertise as a truck driver. But the measure of that expertise isn't your ability to do it once, nor is it doing it fast. It's doing it the 1,000th time out of 1,000, not 999. This isn't something you can afford to get wrong, even once. There's a lot to consider before you point the bonnet off a big hill, but we can break it down into 3 main topics. So 1, the hill itself, 2, your equipment, and finally 3, the conditions. The first thing you need to know about a big hill is that it's on your run, and where is it? This might seem obvious, but say you get put on a new run outside of your normal area, it's not just reasonable, but a bloody good idea to ask, are there any big hills I need to know about? Once you know that, next you should know where the hill starts and ends. In particular, what's the last safe place to pull up before the top? You're not going to stop every time, but on your first run, I'd definitely encourage you to pull up, walk a lap of the truck, and make sure you poke off the top of that hill with a fresh mind and cold brakes. From that day on, As you approach that bay, ask yourself, how am I doing? Would it be smart to take 5 for a breather and a quick check? And if in doubt, pull up. Now that you know that you've got a big hill on your run, the next thing you need to know is how long, how steep, and how twisty it is. Every hill is different. Some are steep but short, some are long and twisty. The curves can catch you out. You might have picked a speed where you can do the grade, but end up going too fast to make it around the hairpin halfway down. Finally, on the road itself, is there any other features you should be aware of? First, are there any arrestor beds? Where are they? And which side of the road are they on? Is it one big decline, or is there a flat somewhere in the middle? Are there any intersections where you might have issues with traffic, like Mount Ousley? Is there anything else which might catch you out? In the farm pickup game, you're likely to face steep descents away from major highways, so they are likely to have narrow lanes with no shoulders. Limited or no guardrails and arrestor beds are rare, and if they are there, might be awkward, narrow and overgrown. So in our line of work, you better bring your A game. We know that we've got a big hill, where it is, how steep it is, and anything else that makes it special. With that all under control, the next thing we need to consider is what you're driving. As a tanker driver, you should be all over your combination weights, and it goes without saying that it takes a lot more care to get off a hill at 108 tonne than it does at 25 tonne. Probably the biggest risk here is that you're on a familiar run that you've done 50 times before, and you settle into a groove and forget that something has changed. Maybe the approval finally came through, and instead of pulling an A double, you're finally pulling that B triple set. My advice is, as you approach that last stopping bay at the top of the hill that we talked about earlier, make sure you consciously think through how your weight today compares to other runs. Endurance brake. It just means a jake, a retarder, or an exhaust brake. These are ways to slow your combination without using the brake pedal. Before you push off the top of a big hill, you really need to have a sense of how much braking capacity you've got in whatever you're driving, particularly when you've changed trucks. In general, endurance brakes have been getting more powerful over the years, particularly the retarders fitted to some European prime movers. But that creates its own challenge. If you've been spoilt with really great endurance braking power and you jump into another truck where yours is in the workshop, make sure you go down a couple of gears and take it easy. On the subject of gears, you need to decide what gear you're going to use before you think about starting down that hill. If you're not certain, you sure as heck want to err on the side of a lower gear. Once you know what gear you want, if you're in an auto, then make sure you know how to use any gear hold features that your truck has. I can't tell you what the right gear is, but a rule of thumb is to go down the hill in the gear you'd need to go up. And if you're not sure, err low. So, that's the key things about what you're driving, how much it weighs and how well it can slow that weight without needing the brakes. This brings us to the final factor to think about, the conditions on the day. There's a lot of things which might change how you need to approach a descent on any given day. So we'll start with the big ones and work our way down. Firstly, the weather. When you're slowing your combination on the jake or other endurance brake, you're doing all the deceleration using just the drive tyres. When it is wet, those tyres have less grip available, so you need to take it slower, sometimes much slower. If the circumstances demand, you can lock your power divider to reduce the risk of truck braking traction. Next is traffic. Maybe it's the day before the sale at the local sale yards. Maybe they're harvesting logs out of the forest nearby. Maybe it's school holidays or there's a caravan show on. Whatever it is, just think about other road users. Remember that your company name is written in metre-high letters on the side of the truck and adjust your driving behaviour to make sure you get home that 1,000th time out of 1,000. Now, let's talk about you and your headspace. In the run-up to the top of the hill, I encourage you to do a bit of a self-check. Is your head in the game or could you do with the brake? Are you angry? Pull up and take a breather. If you're feeling the time pinch and trying to make miles and thinking about pushing on your way down the hill, that might be the most important time to take a breather. Nobody will remember in a year's time that you're 10 minutes late, but they'll certainly remember if you don't get there at all. Is there anything you've missed? Roadworks? That oversize you heard of on the UHF? No? Well, sounds like we're good. We know where the hill is and how big it is. We understand our truck and how heavy we're running, and we've thought about what might be different today. Time to slow it down, pick our gear, set the Jake on high, and listen to the song of our people. Have a great day and stay safe.
Lovely guy when he's not in front of a camera, freaks out and starts pouring sweat. Maybe you turn the camera on while I'm trying to learn to speak. Absolutely, ex-military, really passionate driver trainer, really good about safety.
It's just a bit wooden there, right?
Oh, so wooden, poor guy. If you watch the light as he does his piece from the start to the end of the video, the sunlight goes from being over here to being over here because it was like 468 takes over the space of 6 hours to get that. Poor guy, lovely, absolutely lovely guy.
Just a couple of things on there that I noticed, one when he talks about pull it up, let your brakes cool. The problem when you lock your brakes on to get out and walk around is actually heats everything up because you're locking the drums against the pads, so you're actually transferring more heat into them. Golden rule of being braking downhill is you've got to be off them at least as much as you're on them, probably twice as much. The other thing is for a new driver, when you're going downhill, there are a lot of autos, but if you get in and pick a low gear and you're going downhill and you're in too low a gear, you cannot change up gears. You can't find another gear.
Yeah, so you've got there at that point.
You've absolutely got to stop, pick third or fourth or whatever it is, 2 or 3 up, and then let it roll away. If you try and change up a gear running at lower speed, you'll just change your gear all the way. So they're probably 2 main.
And there's a few more we want to make. So things like, for example, explaining the difference between an exhaust breaker, Jake, and retarder, and giving some examples, because that inability to give a number. Drivers would love it. Particularly a new driver, it would be great if someone who did exactly my run in exactly my truck could say to me, oh yeah, I normally run down that hill, 8th gear, Jake on medium, except where it gets steep past the arrestor bed, then go to high. Cool. That would be wonderful. We can't, we're never going to be able to give that sort of advice. But what I want to do is do probably a week, it don't take too much time, but like a week exhaust brake, maybe as a truck and dog, a North American truck with a Jake, probably as a double, and then something like a Scania Revolver with a retarder, probably as an AB triple, then go down Toowoomba range empty, have the drivers talk through what gear am I, what speed am I doing, how's it feeling, what's the driving feel like, then load them up to absolute maximum masses, so like for the triple, ideally you get on, say it's on permit running really heavy, run them down again and have the comparison to go and say, hey look, this is how it is. But even despite the differences in weight, there's every chance that that thing with like a Pinot or something with a relatively weak Jake is going to have to go down the slowest of the 3 once it's loaded up, even though it only weighs half as much, because it just doesn't have the retarding capacity. So there's more there, and I say what we're pushing for is a whole program of work. There's 2 more ideas I'll show you later. I'd like
to come and touch base with a lot of this stuff on you because you brought up either things I didn't want to say on the camera.
So there's another one. You said we have an issue in livestock transport with single vehicle untripped rollover crashes. So there's 2 risks in livestock: falling asleep and falling over. And one of the challenges is they are the most resistant to technology. There's some good things. B triples are an exceptionally stable combination, and they've been, the livestock transport guys have grabbed them with both hands, and you see a lot more B triples proportionally there compared to A doubles than you might see in general freight. But there's something, basically we worked with an ALRTA project, not ours, we helped them with that to say, how do we do smart braking systems in livestock transport but do it well? And so much of that is around taking our people on the journey and the change management side, doing it with your people, not to your people. We made this video as a bit of a teaser to raise some awareness. So I'll mash play on this now and then stick my
cart and cattle. I don't miss driving trucks, but I miss cutting cattle.
Right,
12 years.
Cross your fingers that this works.
G'day, Adam from the National Truck Accident Research Centre here, and we've had the absolute privilege of partnering with the Australian Livestock and Rural Transporters Association on their Braking Habits project. I just want to take a bit of time to talk about electronic stability control and why I think we really need to give it a good look in the livestock transport space. One of the key risks in livestock transport are what are known as single vehicle untripped rollover crashes, where with our combination of our 4.6 metre height but only 2.5 metre width, the truck goes into a corner or a bend, the inside wheels come off the ground and a rollover results. Now, I'm going to do a bit of myth busting here. A lot of drivers will say, oh, that won't happen to me. If you can't feel it through the seat of your pants, you shouldn't be driving a truck. And I've just got to challenge that in that the average age and experience of the drivers we see having these incidents means it just doesn't stack up. But I don't want you to believe me. I want you to listen to Paul Fellows. Now, for those of you that don't know Paul and Jenny Fellows run a fantastic bulk transport business out of Deniliquin in regional New South Wales. Now, Paul's got the big fleet of shiny Kenworths. He's not only can he drive a Road Ranger, he can drive it into the shed, pull it out, rebuild it on the bench, put it back in and drive it back out again. He's a truckie's truckie. So yeah, they're in bulk transport rather than livestock, but I want you to share the experience he took away from a recent technology demonstration day with brake technology vendor Norbrems. Among other demonstrations, the real draw card of this event was using Norbrems' specially equipped semi-trailer to demonstrate rollover behaviour on the fantastic skid pan at Decker in Shepparton. Now you've got to understand here, Paul's no fool. He knows that the purpose of this day is to go out in that skid pan and roll a trailer. He got to see his fantastic wife, Jenny Fellows, do the same demonstration 20 minutes prior. So if ever there was a time when he was paying attention, waiting to feel that rollover moment, this is it. So he comes into the skid pan, 52 kilometres an hour, turns it left into a 50 metre radius corner. Now I want you to pay attention to is Paul's reactions as that takes place, because I think that is really powerful for taking this discussion forwards. All right, take it away, Paul.
So I'll just quickly run through what we're about to do. So I'm just gonna, so right now we have got no system on. So trailer's unplugged as well. So I'm just gonna show you what it's like with nothing sort of a system.
So how fast do you go?
52.
Oh yeah,
51, 52.
that's not quick, is it? Not that big yet.
There we go.
What a winner. Well, I didn't even feel that.
There. Very subtle.
All right, let's go back and watch this again because there's obviously a lot to unpack here. All right, now Paul's paying a lot of attention here. He knows what's about to come up. All right, starts to turn it left, and here is the moment. Right there is where the wheels of the trailer have come off the ground. Paul, he's still waiting to feel anything. He's still patiently waiting. Now watch in the top left when we unfreeze this. Watch how much ground that trailer covers before Paul knows anything is going on. So in the end, he covers more than the length of that semi-trailer combination before he gets told, not feels, gets told that the combination has gone over. Now, just in case anyone's saying, it was just picking a couple of wheels off the ground, it wouldn't have gone over. I've got a couple more views to show you here. Firstly, looking forwards to show what happens on the drive group on the prime mover, but particularly have a look in the top right corner and see how hard that outrigger smashes into the ground as it tries to go over. This is a big hit, 100%. If not for those outriggers, this combination is laying on its side. So drive group's in the air, triaxle group on the trailer's in the air, outrigger is mashed into the ground. This is a big event. All right, now let's pick back up with Paul as he tries to unpack what he's just experienced.
It's a very subtle experience, and then once you're like, I'm about to roll, it's too late.
That's frightening. As a driver, like I've watched it from over here, and my wife went around and I said,
Yeah,
this is recording, is it, Adam? But
it looks much crazier from the outside, but when you're in here, you don't really feel much.
and that's what Jenny said. She said you don't even feel it go.
Yeah.
And Adam said, most guys, when they realise they're in a rollover, usually the bonnet, so there's a chassis to this, so
Yeah.
or they're on the side, they don't actually realise it's happening.
Now on this run, they repeat the same manoeuvre, but this time with the ESP, the roll stability and electronic stability program on the prime mover turned on. So it uses the brakes of the trailer, but it doesn't use the smarts in the brakes on the trailer. Now have a look at the difference here.
So I'm just gonna come really fast at this.
Now, I'm going to play this from a few more views because right now you might be thinking that you missed it and you're both right and you're wrong. So we'll start with the drone view and have a watch of this as it runs from the outside.
Demonstration.
you can see the prime mover sort of squirm there as it loads up those outside tyres as the smart braking pulls energy out of the system. All right, let's take a look at it from the underside of the prime mover. I mean, if you're really paying attention, you can see it squat down onto that right front tyre. But beyond that, the real takeaway is there's almost nothing to see. And that is the power of electronic stability control. It turns what was a potentially catastrophic event into something that is barely worth watching. And this, for me, is why we as an industry need to have a really good hard look at this technology. But a few points on this. Firstly, our drivers are and will remain and will always remain our number one risk managers. Secondly, though, to err is human. That we saw with Paul's experience that you cannot reliably feel this through the seat of your pants. So things will go wrong, and these technologies can be there to protect our people and get them home safe when they make those very human mistakes. Third, it's going to be a journey. We're going to learn a lot in this process, and the intention of the ALRTA Braking Habits Project isn't to promise some sort of silver bullet. It's not to say this is going to be easy. It's to say it's worth exploring and to give you some tools to help you on that journey. But there will be more steps, and I encourage everyone, use your association relationships to share what you learn. And this way we get the benefit of learning from each other's mistakes rather than everyone having to make them. Anyway, thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Your operators presentation. And 3 Fraser's case studies in that, or 3 business studies. Fraser's out of
Would you like no one's playing on the
I was playing the screens out there as well. Oh my, excellent. I hope they enjoyed it. Fraser's out of Warwick, obviously. We had Betts out of Walker in New South Wales, and we had Hawkins Transport in Victoria, which is essentially now they've sold off the years and now owner drivers, which is nice. We had owner driver, small, medium, and big fleet, and all with really challenging experiences. You will not talk to a driver in the heavy vehicle space that hasn't had a shitty experience with this technology. Things where the trailer is either massively overbraked or massively underbraked. In the livestock space, that's probably because it's an animal welfare issue. The Fraser's line is we hire cattlemen first and drivers second. And I had drivers that were saying, I don't care about the risk of the rollover crash. I will not do that to my cattle. And that's a credit to them. But the commitment then is really to go back to the vendors and say, your product is not match fit. Fix your product, and that's very much what we've been doing, is really helping to have that discussion, because the challenge you've got is it's not the trailer builder, it's not the prime mover manufacturer, it's a mix between the engineer who made a bunch of arbitrary decisions around the calibration of the prime mover and the vendor who sold the brake system to the trailer builder, some engineer in their ecosystem that made a bunch of similar arbitrary decisions around the calibration of the prime mover, around the trailers. And normal people in the transport industry don't have access to bring those 2 people into a room and yell at them for a while, and thankfully I do.
And I saw a report where Kane and the Betts driver were 2 that never had any responses.
And a credit to them both.
I know Kane quite well. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah. And his journey is typical. That is, where you're one of the ones that are trying to do well with this technology. And the first time you get your fingers burnt, the second time you get your fingers burnt, the third time you get your fingers stepped on, the fourth time you get your fingers burnt, and eventually about the 11th effort, you finally get a system that does what it needs to do reliably. And it's a credit to those people for sticking around through, it's not once bitten, twice shy, it's 11 times in and still going back for more. And that's what I really meant when I said at the end of that around, you guys, the more you can talk and compare notes and learn how to make this work from each other. For a start, if you're a brake vendor and you're not delivering for your customers in this space, and they're talking about it through the likes of their association links, well, shit, you're not getting any more business. That's what I expect to see through this work, is a lot of my bigger livestock carriers particularly saying to their trailer builders, we now have views, not just on, they've always had views on, I want this suspension, I want, all of these features. I want there to be a new row down the bottom where it says, these are the, or new set of rows down the bottom with their specification. These are the things we require in terms of the braking system, because our drivers and our workshop people are told that's what they need. Anyway, it's really cool. I'm just the luckiest bugger in transport because I get to do cool stuff like this.
I completely remember 2 cases where I wished I'd had that braking system. I didn't tip over, but only clearly because I did panic. But I was in a position, whatever. One, the truck wasn't speed limited, saved me because I could keep on accelerating. And the other one, I just picked it up quickly that what was going on and kind of did the same thing. Just slammed on the brakes and then accelerated hard through the corner, and all the sheep went up against the front wall, so that when I had to nail it again and turn, they didn't do this one because they were all pushing back and bracing themselves. I did it deliberately, punched them into the wall because sheep scamper and the centre of gravity's high, right?
And we are about to see, assuming all the HVR amendments go the way they go, is so livestock and a few other categories will be 4.6 metres high for a very long time. Everything else was 4.3. We're about to see 4.6 granted as the new general height restriction. And so some of the lessons that have been hard learnt in refridge and livestock are now going to have to be transferred across into everybody else as well. And that's going to be an interesting time. All right. I thank the non-truck people for their patience. I hope that if anyone has any questions on it, reach out and get in contact.
I think we can thank both our presenters today to have a presentation that combines a bit of data and a bit of the view from truck drivers. So thank you both.